I feel tiny. I need my epic music to make me feel epic again. Cue it. Okay, I'm trying out a new camera. I'll be honest, I don't see anything 4K. I mean, maybe because my screen is just scrunching the 1080 and the 4K into a space. I told you, I need big screens. And I cannot lie. But I feel small in this space. And it's so broad. You could see my keys. You can see my lion, Der Löwe. You can see all the crazy books. It's bizarre. I need to adjust this. Something's got to give, something's got to give, something's got to give. But what I want to talk about today is a thought I had with all the buzz about Avengers Endgame and the buzz about Game of Thrones, which I'm actually watching Game of Thrones. I'm probably not going to watch. I'm not really into the MCU as much as some people. I'm not trashing it. Like a lot of people are, and shame on you. Come on, let people have their things. I mean, I might trash individual movies. I might, criticize choices that are made. But just because people like it, let people like things they like. And, you can just say, I disagree with you. But I'm probably not, I'm not into it. I didn't watch Infinity War in the theaters. I will watch it. I'll watch it once it streams. I probably won't buy it. I'll probably rent it. But my thought was this, because Game of Thrones is a television show, and Endgame is a movie, but it's part of a series of movies that kind of plays out like a television show. The same way that Game of Thrones is a television show, which individual episodes kind of play out like movies, even though there is this long arc. And there's a long arc to the MCU series of movies. And it finally occurred to me that something that's always bothered me is when I'm talking about fiction, and I have to talk about, I'll say novels and plays, television shows and movies. And television shows and movies, to me, are the same. They have different places where you watch them, but they're the same type of thing. It's always struck me as a sort of artificial, even before we've got to this point where you're having these really cinematic shows like Game of Thrones. It always struck me as an artificial division, and I want to stop saying television shows and films when I'm trying to talk about this type of story, this visual type of storytelling, this visual produced type of storytelling that is like stage plays, but I think those two things, you can't conflate them. Even though sometimes stage plays are adapted, they're different. It's the same way that novels are adapted to film or to the stage, but they're not the same. To me, novels and I don't even like that. I think novellas and novelettes and even short stories, this is one thing, and stage plays are another thing, and films, television shows, that's a third thing all in itself. And what really drove this home to me was that I was thinking about how a lot of television shows these days, where they have this long arc storytelling that's planned out. I mean, Game of Thrones was planned out. There were things that were known from the beginning. So they could build this long arc, so you had a lot of little movies that built to a big movie. And the MCU was the same way, because they're drawing things from the comics. So they always knew kind of where they could go. And the little teasers at the end of the movies told you that there was this long arc. So it just like Game of Thrones, the MCU series of movies is like a series of episodes in a longer, every one of them had to have their own little 3-act structure, but there's this larger structure over that. And just like in Game of Thrones, and in a lot of really well done shows like Breaking Bad, where they had this concept of what they wanted to happen with this character, so that the entire series And you can see in series that kind of crumbled at the end where they didn't have this, like Dexter, where at the end of Dexter they were just like, we need to wrap this up somehow, because they weren't thinking of the entire series as an arc. And that's when it's done best. And as I was thinking about this, especially in television, this being a recent development, it occurred to me that one of my favorite shows of all time, which I at one point binge watched episode 1 to the last episode, which is MASH. And I mean, I have my criticisms about MASH, but all in all, I like that series and I watched it. I mean, I was a maniac. I watched nothing else when I was binge watching. It was, well, you can't because there's so much of it. I was watching it over and over. And as I was thinking about this idea that television and film, especially as you started to have these franchises like the MCU and now the DC universe, and you had you have the pattern of the trilogy that came out with, you know, you had, you know, with the Star Wars, the original Star Wars trilogy did this, and then it became a thing, you know, and it culminated, I think, one of the most well organized, although, you know, clearly the first movie was kind of set up to not be part of a trilogy, but really it's a very well done trilogy. And of course, adapted from novels, the Lord of the Rings trilogy was this, you know, every film had its arc, but there was a larger arc over it. But then it became this thing where it was more of a long series with MCU really brought this out. And I was thinking about it as film and television kind of converging. But then I realized MASH did this too. And they didn't really do it, they didn't plan it out, but it happened that way anyway. And you can sort of, if you binge watch it, I remember binge watching it, and the entire series, you know, every episode has its, you know, its acts and its rise and denouement, but the entire series also does. And they kind of lucked into it. They kind of, I think they were instinctively understanding where they were going with this, which is kind of amazing, because they hit the plot point at the end of Act 1 at the perfect time when they couldn't have known how long the series would run. But they hit it at the end of, I think it was episode 3, about a third of the way through. A little bit less than a third. Well, maybe it was it 11 seasons? Well, anyway, about a third of the way through when Blake is going home. Now, those first few seasons were mostly just pure comedy. There was a little political commentary in there, but there wasn't anything as serious as what was going to come after. But when Blake was going to go home, and spoiler alert, his plane goes down. And at the end of that episode, and they did a really good thing, they didn't tell most of the cast that this was going to happen. So when they were recording the scene where, I believe it was Radar, comes in and announces that the plane goes down and everyone was dead, including Blake, who had been the colonel of the of MASH the whole time up to that point, and everybody reacted very emotionally. That changed the tone of the show, and that was the end of Act 1 in that long arc, and for the rest of the show, this changed from being a comedy with some drama elements to a drama with some comedy elements and some comedy episodes, some episodes that were mostly comedy. But there was some real serious stuff after that, especially once it started to play toward the end. It got really serious, and you had some fine stories that were really about humanity in war. And so when I was thinking back, I was like, no, you know, this sort of convergence of these forms started a lot earlier than we normally think about series that have these long planned arcs. MASH is the first that I can think of where they had this really, and sort of, it just sort of organically came into the series as, you know, they first figured out, oh, we really got something here, let's make this serious. And they made it serious. And that end of Act 1, and then they played it out in a really a perfect cinematic arc over that series. So I was struck by how I think this process is complete. If you're making series of movies, or if you're making a television series and you're not thinking, we've got X number of seasons to accomplish this larger series, this larger story arc. If you're not thinking this, we're going to do a trilogy. Of course, you can still do single hit movies if you want to, you know. But if you're going into that sequel of a movie and you're not thinking we could do a trilogy here or maybe 4, we need to not just treat this like it's a standalone movie. We need to build an arc. You're not getting what's going on in this medium. And when I say medium, I mean television and film, the big screen too, because I think these two things, they're just 2 different screens, and we just see them with 2 different sets of people. So we need a term. And the only term that I think works, unfortunately, is screenplay. And we use the term screenplay to mean the thing that what we see on the screen is made from. But when we say stage play, we don't mean just the script that the actors, we mean the thing. That's a stage play. And I think we need to repurpose the term screenplay to mean what you actually watch on your television screen or on your computer or on your tablet or on your phone or in the cinema, whether it's a regular screen or IMAX or whatever. We need to start using the single term screenplay for this sort of recorded narrative. Images of people acting out this narrative with CGI maybe added and scene cuts and things like that to indicate a single form of narrative. There's the storytelling, the written part, which I still, honestly, I want one word. I don't like novels because, as I said, it's too exclusive. But that method of storytelling, and then stage plays, and then screenplays. And that right now, as far as I can think, those are the big 3. I mean, you could argue that, for example, in music, concept albums do this. And, you know, I can think of some good, The Wall, but of course that was a film too. But, you know, people don't do concept albums as much. If that came back into fashion, then I might argue that we might need to include that as a 4th category. But right now, the 3 categories I see are the written narratives, which would include short stories, novellas, novels, and series of novels, stage plays, and what I am going to insist on calling from now on screenplays. So I hope you guys get on board. You know, it's not a crusade. This isn't a hill I want to die on, but I definitely think that this is something that would help us understand film and television better, that they're not different things anymore, if they ever were. I think that people saw them as different, and it took them a while to realize that they're not different. They're really the same sort of presentation of a narrative for just different one of them is in a theater, and one of them is in traditionally a television screen, and now all the alternatives to television screens that we have. So screenplay is what I'm going to say screenplay from now on, both here and on the Two Johns podcast. And John might be annoyed at that, but maybe he won't. We'll find out. I'll find out, won't I? Anyway, if you like this sort of random theorizing and rants on things that I really feel strongly about, then like this video, share it with your friends, see what they think. They probably think I'm a raving lunatic as well, just like you doubtlessly do. And if you like it, or if you don't, either way, just subscribe and you'll get more thoughts of Leaf.